Welcome to the limited audio series, St. Louis Suffragists Today. This is an LWVSTL production and an effort by the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis to share the stories of our St. Louis League leaders. Thank you for joining us. In 2020, the League of Women Voters celebrated their 100-year anniversary. We want to honor the women whose shoulders we stand on. The reality of women's rights today was enabled by the women in our past. The oral histories of League leaders capture the voices of women who were in the thick of it, learning to use their voices at the ballot box and in the halls of government where policy is made. They were and are making a difference in our democracy. When they share their stories, they teach us about the persistence needed over the course of decades to be an effective voice. These audio recordings bring you a series of interviews with longtime Leaguers. This project accompanies the book, Raising Our Voices by Nicole Evelina. I am Angie Dunlap, current president of the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis. Before we hear from League member Linda McDaniel, I would like to tell listeners about Seneca Falls, which Linda mentions in her talk. Seneca Falls, New York, 1848, was the location of the first Women's Rights Convention. It brought together progressively minded women, progressive at the time, and men who knew that women needed equal rights. Famous names that attended this event were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucretia Mott, and Frederick Douglass. They wrote a declaration of sentiments that aired grievances about what women were denied. Women could not own property then or earn her own wages. Women were not allowed to be the guardians of their own children in divorce. Women were only allowed access to limited schooling, and they were denied almost any decent paying jobs. The Declaration of Sentiments in 1848 demanded equal social status and the vote for women. Actually, the first draft of the Declaration had the right to vote further down in the list of demands. But then someone made the point, and I paraphrase, how do you think you're going to get any of this wish list unless women have the vote? So access to the franchise was put at the top of the list of demands. To me, this says it all. The vote is the singular right that is foundational for all other rights in our democracy. I visited Seneca Falls in 2015, and I found the Women's Rights Museum there to be inspiring. Check it out if you ever get the chance to be up in the northern New York area. Now, a little bit from the book, Raising Our Voices by Nicole Evelina. Healthcare has long been an issue of concern to League members. Linda McDaniel was active in League work in the 1990s to protect the public's interest when Blue Cross Blue Shield tried to transfer all its nonprofit assets to a for-profit company. From the book, I learn about this action by citizens and League members. A coalition of 65 Missouri groups representing healthcare customers was quickly formed under the name Missouri Consumer Healthcare Watch, with Rachel Farfitch, LWV Missouri's Director for Health Issues, named as chairman. The League and other consumer groups attempted to join the lawsuit, but a judge ruled they could not. So the League sent a friend of the court paper saying that Blue Cross Blue Shield abused or exceeded its authority as a nonprofit by transferring its assets to a for-profit subsidiary, which was organized to benefit private shareholders. In the end, there was a settlement, and the result was the creation of the Missouri Foundation for Health, which inherited all the money from Blue Cross Blue Shield as a profit-making entity. And the foundation received over $1 billion from the sale of shares of the new for-profit company. Now, from the book, this is just one example where the League was making a difference in issues important to citizens. You will learn of the League's persistence as you hear Linda McDaniel talk with St. Louis intern Anna Reynolds.
Do you recall when you joined the League?
Yes, I do. It was in 1960 when I was a senior in high school. I was going door to door, just leaving brochures. I was doing party precinct work. And there was a woman who lived across the street from me who was doing the same. She said, I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, and I think you might be really interested in this. Come to a luncheon with me. I remember that they talked about the function of the League was to study, and after studying, coming to a position and being able to act on them. And that all this was happening at the same time across the nation, the same month, or maybe even the same week back then. I thought that was the neatest thing I had ever heard of, and sold me on the League. Of course, at 18, there was no way I could join because the membership level was for 21. I think I attended a few meetings. That was my senior year in high school. When I went to the University of Kansas, I did attend a few meetings. When you're in college, you don't have time for extra meetings, but I did attend one or two. When I got married, which was about 4 or 5 years later, we happened to move to New York. I was able to attend some meetings in Poughkeepsie. A year after that, we moved to Boulder. I was able to pick up membership in Boulder and attended some meetings. About a year after that, we moved to St. Louis. So here I am. I remember in the early days that I really valued the fact that once you joined the League, you were included in the League wherever you might move. I thought that was really neat because that would be a way to find out where's the best, easiest grocery store and those kinds of things, as well as what's happening in the community and the politics of that specific area. So that was one reason why when I did move around, I made a point of joining the leagues. We moved to St. Louis in 1967. And then I, of course, transferred my membership to St. Louis, and I've been here ever since.
You mentioned being heavily politically active, even doing the brochures. That's pretty significant for an 18-year-old, especially an 18-year-old female in 1960. What got you so politically active?
The only thing I can think of is at dinner time, my folks like to listen to the news. Obviously, I had to listen too. My folks were interested when McCarthy, no, not McCarthy, it was the guy that was in Japan.
General MacArthur.
He was called back to the United States because I don't remember who the president was, maybe Truman, didn't like what he was doing. I guess that really perked my interest, just hearing a little bit in the news, but it just didn't seem fair to me. And I've been following politics ever since. I majored in poli-sci.
Awesome. Were you originally born in St. Louis?
No, I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, because my folks lived in Texas, very close to the Louisiana border, and Shreveport was the closest real hospital. I lived in Texas about 5 years, and then my folks moved to Tulsa. That's where I grew up.
Over the years, how has the league changed?
It's interesting. In the early 70s, the St. Louis area was made up of, I want to say, 5 different local leagues, which were totally independent. They had their own president, their own treasurer, the whole schmear. They were all very independent and decided what they wanted to do. I became president of, quote, the North County League of Women Voters, which was in Florissant. A little bit after that, League realized that we were, quite honestly, running out of people to be presidents and serve all those positions. So we talked about it for a while among the 5 local leagues. That's how we had the League of Women Voters of what we just called St. Louis, which was St. Louis County. There was also the League of Women Voters of St. Louis. The St. Louis League was really formed in about 1920. It was one of the originals. The other organizations were formed in later years. I don't remember when on all of them, but the city was an entity into itself. When the county league formed, all those 5 independent leagues sort of came together. It was quite a number of years later when the city joined with the St. Louis County League. Then we became the League of Metro St. Louis. The city league was formed in 1920. what's interesting is that I think you probably heard some of this story, but when the League was formed out of the suffragist movement, the League decided it wanted to have citizenship schools. So the city was one of those places. The idea was to do citizenship schools so people could be informed about what elections all about. They also taught parliamentary procedure. I think they talked about how to talk about an issue and all those kinds of things. Quite a number of women attended. In fact, it was even sponsored by the St. Louis School District. They had meetings in the evenings for these, quote, citizenship schools. And this was happening across the United States. But I think it was really neat that the League was able to present these schools in 1920. Okay, women had the right to vote, but not everybody knew what that meant.
And a lot of people just voted the way their husbands voted. They weren't really informed voters. Not that it's wrong to vote the same way as somebody you care about, but if you don't really know the issues.
It's also interesting, in 1920, the League began, and we were going to be nonpartisan. The leaders in the city of St. Louis didn't believe that was possible. So they required that the League have a Republican president, a Democratic president, and then I think an independent president. I don't know, maybe 3 years, not too long. And then they started the idea that we were really nonpartisan. We were able to fall back into just one president. One other interesting story, I don't know if you're familiar with Edna Gellhorn. She was a real mover and shaker in the suffragist movement. I think you probably heard about the walkless, talkless. There was one in St. Louis, and that was in 1916. And the Democratic Convention was going to be held in St. Louis. So the leagues across the nation were wanting the suffrage issue on the party platform. The suffragists thought about what they could do. Some people were going to have a little bit of roarish county kind of parade or something like that. And it was interesting, in St. Louis, they decided we're not so sure St. Louis is acceptable to that kind of aggressive activity or whatever. So they decided just to form what they called the walkless, talkless parade. They lined both sides of the street of Locust, which is where the delegates would have to walk to get to the convention center. Just stood there. They did not say one word. They had their yellow sashes that said votes for women and yellow umbrellas, and mostly were wearing white. They just stood there with their signs and didn't say anything. And it was successful because the platform did include a suffragist plank. And the same thing for the Republican convention. I don't know where that convention was held, but it did include a plank for suffrage. So the suffragists did a tremendous amount of strategy to try and figure out how to get the amendment passed. It took them almost 80 years from the time they had the conception of rights to vote to the time of the 19th Amendment. So that's a really long time. Another thing that was in our archives that I have is a poster that went in people's houses, in their front door or their front windows, that says, "A woman living here has registered, thereby assuming responsibility of citizenship."
This is so cool.
I believe it was in 1920 that poster was in women's front windows.
I know you said you studied political science. Did you also study history? Because you talk like a historian.
What happened was that in 1920, people gathered in Chicago for the convention that set up the bylaws and made everything really official. And many of them took the train from St. Louis to Chicago. So we came up with the idea, wow, wouldn't that be fun if League members could come to St. Louis and we could take the train, the same train, to Chicago for our convention. So we did. And since I was president at the time, I needed to study up on all that so I could talk to people and tell them what happened 75 years ago. So that's where that comes from. And then once I started reading it, I was just really fascinated, because in the 1800s, women would just get on a milk train. They'd be alone, or they'd get on a stagecoach or whatever, and they just go off to some little city, never been there before. nobody with them, and they would walk around and find some place where they could have a meeting. Then they put up posters, learn about suffragists or voting or whatever. I'm not sure what they said. I just thought it was amazing that women in those times were traveling alone and that they had the courage to do that. I thought that was just really amazing. But at the same time, in New York, in Seneca Falls, it was a revolution or a resolution about women's rights and women's right to vote.
Yeah, the Declaration
Yeah.
of Seneca Falls.
At that time, women weren't allowed to clap. So they all took their handkerchiefs and would wave. And so that's what amounted to clapping, because women were not supposed to be very assertive. Women were not supposed to speak, period. So they couldn't speak, but they could wave their handkerchiefs. It was just really fascinating to me that women of that time were so limited. A few husbands would allow their wives to be educated. Many of them had libraries and different kinds of legal documents and stuff like that. And a few of them would allow their wives to read that stuff. It's just fascinating.
Oh my God, this is so cool. This is amazing. I'm loving this. How do you think the League has been important to the greater St. Louis community? I know you talked a lot about the citizenship schools. I know those were a little earlier, but you've been going to League meetings since 1960. So obviously you have pretty good insight on how it's been effective.
It was before my time, but I know that the junior colleges were established not solely by the League of Women Voters, but the League was very involved in the establishment of community colleges. They were also very involved in the establishment of judges, nonpartisan court plan, which has also been copied in many states over the years. There have been, in the last, I'd say 10 years or so, there have been some provisions in the Missouri legislature to change that. And it's not always been real serious with a great deal of support, but the League would always speak up and say, no, this is good. We need nonpartisan judges to make the rulings. So we were very involved in that. We were very involved in the establishment of MSD. And also the League was very involved in healthcare, in the issues of the healthcare agency. We had a woman, a League member, who was really following the healthcare legislation and what it was doing. She picked up on the fact that Blue Cross Blue Shield, who was a not-for-profit, wanted to go for-profit. And I'm abbreviating all this, but they wanted to take their money with them. And we thought, no, that's not right. No. So we got active and talked to the legislature and did a lot of stuff so that the end result, the organization became not for profit. And therefore they inherited all the money from Blue Cross Blue Shield as a profit-making entity. And I can't think of their name right now, but they have been able to give a great deal of grants to a whole variety of organizations about providing health care and the whole big issue of it. I guess I would say that if she had not been aware of what they were trying to do, probably would not have this organization today. Now, certainly the League was not the only one involved, but we were quite prominent in that and catching up on what they were trying to get away with. We didn't like that, and other people heard about it and didn't like it either. We were able to prevent that.
Y'all are like real life superheroes. This is so cool listening to all of this. So you mentioned that you were a League president, and I know you were president in the North County League and the League of Women's Voters in Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. What was the most challenging thing you faced as a League leader?
One thing that the League believes in is we speak with one voice, and there's no question about that. And another thing, when I first learned about the League that I thought was so neat, was that you could attend all these meetings and you would be aware that, okay, the League has a certain perspective. However, at the same time, they were informing everybody about all aspects of it. So if you ended up thinking differently than the League did, you had the information that you could go on and lobby as yourself, as an individual, against whatever the official league was. And I thought it was just neat that an organization would inform people to such an extent that they could be in opposition. And that doesn't happen a whole lot, but still, the information is there for each individual to form their own opinion and then be able to express it in a knowledgeable way. And I just thought that was pretty incredible. As president, you always have to speak what the position of the league is, obviously. And there were times that I needed to make some public statements about some issues that I personally did not follow and agree with, but it came up in the media and I was needing to make a statement for the league, not for myself and not what I personally thought, but what the league thought, even though it was different from what I thought. But I was able to do that. And I guess I would say that would be one of the biggest challenges. People at times also don't understand how we can be nonpartisan. I have no trouble. It was easy for me then and even today, if it would come up for me to talk about a league position, I would know what it is because of my position in the league. I need to know everything we believe. So I can talk that, even though my big heart may be somewhere else, but that's all right. I can do that because I have information, and I guess because I believe in the league and what we stand for.
Now, you mentioned, and this was an interesting point, that the league is nonpartisan, but obviously our governmental system is not
That's right.
nonpartisan. So there have been some pretty contentious elections, races over the years, Goldwater, Trump. Were you ever accused of favoring progressives over conservatives?
Oh, yes. A great deal. And we have been called many names in the legislature. As I say, some people have trouble understanding. But I guess the principle of nonpartisanship and providing both sides of an issue is so important to us that it is our first nature, not even our second, that we are able to do that. We have a great deal of candidate forums. And I think we have had quite a number of comments after them that thanked us and said, yeah, wow, you were really nonpartisan. You presented this fairly, presenting all issues, giving everybody an opportunity to speak. So that's who we are.
I love that. That's a really good answer. Okay. How do you think newer organizations have affected the membership of the league?
Not when we began, but in the 1970s, in a way, you could say the league was the only place for people to be politically active and informed. But during the 70s, there were a number of organizations that would come up, like the Sierra Club, on healthcare, on a whole variety of issues, so that all of a sudden, if people were interested in policy issues, which of course we were, but maybe they were really interested in specifics of quality of water, there would be agencies or organizations that were focusing on those. And so a lot of people would be attracted to those specific organizations and would be leaving the league. That's when things got a little difficult for us because people were attracted to the issues that they were interested in. If you're working on one policy issue, you can see your effectiveness, but if you're working on 8 policy issues, it's a little harder to be as effective as if you're just working on one.
It seems like things move a little slower, even if you are making progress.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
That's hard. Suffrage has clearly been the foundation of the league, and allowing women the right to vote was this gigantic milestone, but obviously it didn't come in one package. It wasn't like all women could vote. It was white women could vote, and then it came in waves afterward. So how do you feel the league has done in terms of encouraging diversity, whether in membership or in the issues that it chooses to take on?
The league today and the past, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so, has been very interested and feel it's important for us to work with other organizations. So we have done that. And then we have also outreached to other organizations such as African American organizations or some of the sororities. And more recently, certainly they have a lot of excellent program about getting out the vote and voting and informing people. We made an effort to work with them. We made a specific effort maybe 7 years ago or so. There was an African American event at the convention, which was a great many organizations that were presenting their organizations for membership and people to find out about them. And so we started working with them on elections and registering. We've done that. We've repeated that. We have concerns about what African American issues are. We have cooperative efforts with them. Also, the extent that we can with Hispanics and other nationalities. We had hoped at one time to work with the Bosnians. We've always got that feeler out about what other people are doing and how we might assist them or they could join us. Like we have candidate forums and have been doing that for many years. We also have sort of an outline for ourselves about what the process is to have our candidates meetings. We cannot have a candidates meeting unless we have at least two parties represented, because otherwise that might be interpreted as our support for the one person, for the one party. And so we have a whole procedure about how we conduct candidates meetings, and we share that freely with any organization so that they can do their own candidates meetings if they want.
So when you say two parties represented, it doesn't necessarily have to be like what we consider the two main parties. It could be like Republican and independent or something.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, several times we have done that because one of the major parties wouldn't attend, but the independent candidate did, and one of the major parties did agree to attend. So we were able to conduct those meetings. Many people felt that was very helpful, and was able also to present the positions on a variety of issues.
I feel a lot of our youth are leaning away from the two-party system. I think it's really nice to see an organization that is willing to host people that aren't necessarily like straight Republican down the line or straight Democrat down the line. Like they'll fit into other little categories. That's always good. How have changes in the political climate over the years affected the league?
Again, we try to do the candidates forums, and we try to involve both parties. Whenever we register to vote, it's real important that we are there and registering anybody who wants to be registered. We encourage everybody to vote. It has been difficult because many of our positions may not follow the positions of all the leaders of the variety of parties or where they go in the legislature. But the thing is, when we state our position of policy, we are stating why that position exists. We're not just saying we support full suffrage. We do, of course, but then we will talk about provisions that we may feel are anti-suffrage and talk about why and what the ramifications are so that people can more fully understand the ins and outs of policy.
Yeah, it's not like you're saying, I support this because I want such and such organization to fund me. You're supporting it because you actually studied it. That's important. Yeah, I think it really shows that education has been and always will be the basis for the league. That's huge to me. I love that. And I feel like at this point, this is almost a stupid question because you've answered this throughout your entire interview, but why is the league important to you and why do you continue your membership?
My highest interest and the kinds of things with the league that I've been involved in have to do with voting and a whole range of issues, not just the fact of going out and voting on election day, but obviously how you can register. What are the provisions to keep people from registering? What about voter roll purges? Understanding why some of those things happen. The cause of them sometimes may be good, but that doesn't mean the end result is good. I think it's acceptable myself to purge the voting list, but there has to be a reason to purge them and that it is equal across the whole, everybody who's registered.
Not just one county or not like gerrymandering or something.
That's right. I guess issues and around voting, registration, redistricting, campaign finance reform. Some friends and I wrote an amendment to the Constitution in the early 80s about campaign finance reform.
Did it pass?
No, of course not. But what was also cool was that we talked the governor somehow or another to appoint a commission to study it. And so I ended up being chair of that commission. We also traveled around the state to take testimony about what people thought about campaign finance and how it should go. And we did have a constitutional amendment on the ballot in the early 80s about campaign finance. It didn't pass, but we made the effort and studied it. Actually, I started in that in 1974. It was after Watergate. And there was some sort of big motion, probably was national, about campaign finance reform. And so it was an initiative to collect signatures. I worked on that. You're not always successful, but you continue to work on it. You understand what your policy and what your priorities are. And it just continues over the years. And we see today it still is continuing. Who knows how many years it's going to take before we have campaign finance reform. And I was also able to work on campaign finance reform with a national organization. It was always interesting. The league is always involved in these kinds of issues. I was able to follow what was happening at that time. It was Maine and I think Arizona that were having some activities on that kind of reform. So I could follow that and take that information and the response to Missouri for consideration of how we might approach it. So all these issues, they continue. And one thing I think we can say about League is it's persistent and doesn't give up.
You have led the most amazing life. I'm just sitting here stunned. You are my Geraldine Ferraro,
Oh, goodness.
my
Oh,
Margaret
no.
Chase Smith. Like, you are so cool. I cannot even believe you're like, oh, I wrote this bill for the Constitution. Oh, I worked on this national campaign.
It's fun. It's just lots of fun. And I just feel it's important. I just really believe in democracy, I guess. I never have necessarily come down that way, but it is important. And it is the way that we can reach equality and representation for everybody, which is what I very strongly believe. It's got to be equal. Everybody should have equal opportunities, whether you're talking about running for office or what.
Just out of curiosity, did you choose to stop at a bachelor's degree?
Yeah,
Okay, because you sound like you have a PhD.
my PhD is the League.
I hope you so enjoyed that interview just like I did. I really appreciate it when Linda says, my PhD is the League. I can testify to that too. In the League of Women Voters, you learn a lot. You heard Linda mention League moderated candidate forums as a way that the League allows for voters to hear both sides. Today, the St. Louis League continues to moderate candidate forums to help citizens ask candidates their questions. This way, voters can connect the issues important to them to a candidate they will see on their ballot. This is a League service for both voters and candidates. Candidates get to explain their opinions on how to handle the problems that concern their constituents in an open public forum, and voters are better informed before they cast their ballot. And a League forum is fair. Every candidate gets equal time to be heard. Our forum rules require respectful dialogue, and candidates should not refer to an opponent or opponent's position, but rather, candidates focus their remarks on what they believe and their own positions. Before the pandemic, all the forums were live in person, with some being recorded for the public to view after. But since the pandemic, the League has learned how to moderate an online forum, and voters get to submit questions online. For the spring 2022 municipal elections, the League of Women Voters of Metro St. Louis moderated 18 forums, a mixture of online and in person. We figure we helped at least 12,000 voters be ready to mark their ballot in that election. Any group can request the League moderate a forum for them. Just go to our League website, LWVSTL.org, click Voter Services, and then click Request a Forum. Thank you for listening today. Thank you to our LWVSTL Centennial Committee, who worked many hours to honor the suffragists of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The interviews were conducted in 2020 and 2021 during COVID, mostly via Zoom. Come back to hear even more about the League's past and present. This oral history was made possible through the generous donations of League members. It's produced by Cindy Lenz and Angie Dunlap.